The agony of the Ukrainian armed forces in Kupiansk. The Russian army breaks through to the city. Latest updates. Greetings, friends. Today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of November 15, 2024. A significant number of events have taken place, so let's get started. We will begin with the Kupiansk direction, which seems to be the source of the most crucial and intriguing news. Starting with the settlement of Kupiansk itself, the map has undergone changes. Some areas have been marked in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, while others are designated as contested territory. The northern part of Kupiansk is now marked as a grey zone. This makes it challenging to ascertain exactly what is happening in this sector of the front line. Why were these adjustments made? On the night between November 13th and 14th, the pro-Ukrainian cartographic service Deep State released footage showing the movement of several military vehicles. At least 3 vehicles were visible, moving from Lyman-Pershyi toward northern Kupiansk through a forested area. The footage also showed artillery strikes, indicating that Ukrainian forces tried to halt the Russian advance. The final scene of the video depicted Russian units seemingly retreating to their base after a possible successful landing operation. Referring back to the map, the vehicles departed from Lyman-Pershyi, moving through narrow forested roads. The last scene showed 2 vehicles, one of which was damaged, retreating north. This suggests that Russian forces had penetrated deeper into Kupiansk than previously thought, but the reasons for their withdrawal remain unclear. The video raises more questions than answers. It shows only the initial movement through the forest and the final retreat toward Lyman-Pershyi, with 1 vehicle damaged en route. What remains unclear is how the Russian forces reached this part of Kupiansk, the extent of their penetration into the city's center, and why they chose this retreat path. After initial panic from the Ukrainian armed forces, one can infer from the map that if Russian units had indeed captured the northern part of Kupiansk, it would spell disaster for Ukrainian forces, not only in Kupiansk itself, but also in areas to the east, such as Petropavlivka, Pishchane, and Kurilivka. These areas could become part of an artillery pocket, severely disadvantaging Ukrainian troops. However, by the morning of November 14th, after the initial shock, certain Ukrainian sources claimed that counterattacks had allowed their forces to regain control of northern Kupiansk. They reported that Russian forces failed to fortify their positions and were pushed back toward Sienkivka or Lyman-Pershyi. Pro-Russian sources, meanwhile, reported that some Russian units had managed to hold positions and were gradually expanding their zone of control. A critical issue for the Russian side is the lack of proper supply lines for their forces in Kupiansk. Supplies are reportedly being delivered via drones, including water, cigarettes, food, and possibly ammunition. These drones, likely of the Baba Yaga type, are not sufficient to fully support the forces in the region, leaving many questions unanswered. Interestingly, the battle for northern Kupiansk did not begin with the recent footage from the pro-Ukrainian cartographic service. On November 11th, pro-Russian sources mentioned that assault units had entrenched themselves on the city's outskirts near the Oskol Stadium. Assaults were also reported to be ongoing on the northern outskirts of Petropavlivka. This suggests that Russian forces had established a presence in Kupiansk several days before the latest developments were publicized. In conclusion, the situation remains fluid and contentious, with both sides presenting conflicting narratives. The reality on the ground is difficult to determine, leaving a great deal of uncertainty surrounding the events in Kupiansk. Back then, coordinates and buildings were unclear. An analysis of the situation in northern Kupiansk and beyond. At the time, it was impossible to determine the exact location or structure where Russian forces had entrenched themselves. However, as noted, reports about the presence of Russian units in the area surfaced as early as 4 days ago, but were largely ignored. The footage released on November 14th by the pro-Ukrainian cartographic service Deep State appears to show the aftermath. The deployment of additional Russian units into northern Kupiansk, possibly even rotations. A key detail in this footage is the movement of Russian vehicles along a specific street. This strongly suggests that during the battle for northern Kupiansk, Russian forces may have reached the M26 highway near the railroad bridge that runs along Svatovska Street. If Russian forces indeed establish control over this area during their offensive, it would place all settlements to the east of the M26 highway, such as Kucherivka, Petropavlivka, and Pishchane, at risk of operational encirclement. These areas, spanning fields between Orlyanka, Novostepova, Novoselivka, and Sinyakivka, face severe logistical disruption. This creates a high probability that Ukrainian forces in the region may begin retreating in the coming days, directly resulting from the loss of northern Kupiansk. We await further updates and new geolocated evidence to clarify the situation. Now let's shift focus to the southern Kupiansk direction, or more precisely, the southern part of northern Kupiansk. Here, pro-Ukrainian sources have published footage of artillery strikes targeting Russian forward positions. The strikes, conducted by Ukraine's 40th Artillery Brigade, were geolocated to forested areas. These strikes led to map changes favoring the armed forces of the Russian Federation by the end of November 14th. Updates from the Sudzha salient and beyond. Moving back toward the Sudzha salient, Russian forces continue their offensive along the southeastern axis. According to cartographic services, the Russian military has slightly expanded its control southwest of Kurakhove, advancing along the state border. To the northwest, intense battles persist. Over recent days, Russian forces have repeatedly attempted to breach Ukrainian defensive lines north of Sverdlikova. These positions are fortified with multiple forested strips serving as strongholds for Ukrainian forces. Despite large-scale assaults involving numerous infantry and dozens of vehicles, footage published by Ukraine's 37th Naval Infantry Brigade suggests heavy Russian losses without achieving a breakthrough. Nonetheless, some cartographic services report minor Russian advancements south of Alexandria, effectively cutting off supplies to Leonidivka and Alexandria from Lebedivka. This isolation could facilitate further Russian offensives from Novoivanivka, potentially bringing these settlements under full Russian control in the near future. Encirclement reports near Kreminna. Reports continue to surface regarding a significant number of Ukrainian soldiers encircled in the forested areas south of Olhivka and southwest of Kreminna. According to some sources and experts, multiple Ukrainian battalions are now fully surrounded and unable to reconnect with their main forces. Developments in Toretsk. Shifting focus further south, we observe significant changes on the map in Toretsk over the past 24 hours. Experts have noted ongoing active combat or Ukrainian counteroffensives in the region. Ukrainian forces reportedly regained control over the northern part of Leonidivka, despite earlier claims of its full capture by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Ukrainian units also reclaimed southern and southeastern portions of the Zabalka neighborhood, highlighting the dynamic nature of this front. These developments underscore the fluidity of the situation across the battlefield, where control frequently changes and the consequences of each maneuver ripple across broader operational zones. In the Kurakhove sector, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported the clearing of Voznesenka, leaving Novoselidivka as the last remaining settlement in this arc, yet to be officially secured. Footage from several days ago showed a Russian flag raised in the southern and central parts of Novoselidivka. However, clearing operations appear to be ongoing in the village's western outskirts and southern farms. Russian units have also reportedly advanced from Ilinka toward Novoilinka, with cartographic services documenting incremental gains. Additionally, on Kurakhove's eastern side, Russian forces are said to have cleared nearly 90% of the area, leaving only a few streets near Blyahodity Lane and Metallurgov Alley under Ukrainian control. The destruction of bridges in the area complicates logistics, and Russian forces are expected to launch a southeastern advance into central Kurakhove soon. The area around Uspanivka remains a focal point of fighting. Ukrainian forces, including the 72nd and 33rd Mechanized Brigades, are defending a heavily fortified position in the forested region. Some cartographic services, including pro-Ukrainian ones, have marked this stronghold as a contested grey zone, signaling an ongoing active assault by Russian forces.